Hello, and welcome to Yogahub podcast, where we bring you conversations with some of the world's leading yoga and movement educators. In this episode, I'm chatting to Victoria Fox. Victoria is a yoga teacher based in London who's lived a very interesting life. She's worked in the record industry, she's owned her own shoe company, and eventually she got into teaching yoga. Through this, she began to study and eventually offer Yoga for Cancer, which aims to use the practice to help people both manage some of the side effects they can have, but also to empower people as they navigate the complexities of living with the illness. We're very, very excited to have Victoria to our Camden Street studio on the 19th of October, where she'll be offering an introductory day to Yoga for Cancer, which will help yoga teachers learn a little bit more about the illness and ways that we can adapt and make the practice a little bit more accessible and useful to people who are dealing with cancer. You can find out a bit more about this at yogahub.ie/workshops. Thank you very much for listening. Here's my conversation with Victoria. So Victoria, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to come on and have this conversation. It looks very beautiful where you are at this moment in time. First and foremost, how are you doing today?
I'm really good, thank you, today. Yeah, today is a good day. It's really nice to be chatting to you, and thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk to you. I'm really excited to be talking to you and also working with you later on this year.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you over. The workshop that you're offering sounds incredibly interesting and just also so important and beneficial. But before we get into that, it could be nice for anybody who's not familiar with your work at this moment in time to maybe take a few moments just to tell us a little bit about your background, maybe the different hats you've worn over the course of your life and how that's led you to where you are today.
Okay, yeah. Actually, no one ever asked me about the different hats I've worn. That's quite funny. So I sort of started my working life working in the music industry. I used to be what you call a record plugger. My job was to put bands on TV. So I worked with various different artists, some very well known, some that never really made it that well. And I did that. And then I changed careers in my late 20s, and I actually went into shoe design. I went back to college and I learned how to make shoes. I worked for Jimmy Choo and set up my own shoe business, which, as you can probably tell by what I'm doing now, didn't work out so well. So I did that for about 5 years, and my business started off better than it ended up, which is not normally the way it should go. And then I had a bit of soul searching. And throughout all this time, I always did yoga. So yoga was my constant. Yoga was always something I went to on my mat. You know, I got on my mat and sometimes wanted to get off my mat because, as we know, when you do yoga, when you quieten things down a bit, sometimes it can be very challenging to be on your yoga mat. But so I was doing yoga all this time, and my husband came home one day with a flyer for a teacher training that was happening locally. And I thought, right, I'm going to do this. I didn't ever think I would probably teach, but I liked yoga, and I thought this would be a good way of learning more about yoga and understanding more about the philosophy. And I took a teacher training, and that was it. Started teaching. So that was in 2008 when I started teaching. And and when I first started teaching, I really did feel, and I don't know if anyone who's done a 200-hour training will empathize with this, I felt like I should have learner plates. You know, I was sort of going into a yoga studio, almost praying no one would come in with any injuries or anything. I didn't really know, I didn't feel that I could really fully support people. So it became more my interest then in studying how to support people. You know, how can I make my classes accessible to everybody, and how can I support people with injuries, not injure people. That was really important to me, that I wasn't going to be injuring people in my classes. And so that was there where my training I started looking out for trainings that were more about accessibility and inclusivity and a lot of anatomy. I did quite a lot of anatomy training because that really interested me as well.
It's quite the background, and I'm curious about the record industry part of your life, because I imagine that was interesting. And if you were doing yoga around that time, now maybe this is just me projecting, but I imagine working in the record industry is somewhat chaotic, working with a lot of big personalities. And so what was it that you found that your yoga practice gave you at that time? And I'm always really interested because I find everyone tends to go on a bit of a journey with these things. What type of yoga were you practicing at the beginning? Was it like power yoga, gentle yoga? And what was it that that drew you in?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be really honest, and it's so interesting how things change, because I think if the first yoga class I'd ever gone to had been a restorative class, I may never have gone back. I was always quite, I liked going to the gym. I'd gone to the gym, from sort of my late teens. So I was quite interested in fitness. And so I think my honest answer would be, this is very honest here, is that I read that Madonna did yoga. And at the time, so this is many years ago now, I thought Madonna looked pretty like a very strong, woman. And I was like, oh, I quite like arms like Madonna. What does she do? And I read she did Ashtanga yoga. So I thought, great, I'll try Ashtanga yoga. And so I went to my first Ashtanga class. And because it's very physical and it's pretty nonstop and a lot of press ups and movement, this just ticked a lot of boxes for me for that age. In my 20s, that was perfect because it was basically like a workout. And for anyone who practices Ashtanga, or if you don't practice Ashtanga, it's a set sequence. So once you learn the sequence, the advantage is you can take it anywhere you go. And so for me, being new to yoga, and because it was physical, so it was a bit like my gym workout, and I could learn the sequence and do it from anywhere. And so that was brilliant for me in my 20s. I did subsequently injure myself, and probably from doing repetitively things wrong, and probably not having a very strong core either, a lot of jumping back and things that probably didn't do me a lot of favors. And I then had to sort of start looking at other yoga practices that maybe weren't as fast, or I for a long time I did come back a lot to vinyasa because I used to really quite like the flow. And actually, even the classes I teach now, bizarrely, and we can talk about it later, but the yoga for cancer class is actually a flow, interestingly, because it works quite well. But yeah, so now it's definitely evolved to, I love restorative. I really like a hatha class with longer holds. I quite like a Iyengar yoga. So I dip in and out of lots of different things because I think there's so much to learn from different teachers and different styles.
Yeah, and I think whenever I talk about Ashtanga, I'm always mindful because I never want to make it sound like I'm dismissing the benefits of it, but it's just such a common story of people doing Ashtanga and loving the intensity of it until eventually the intensity of it doesn't love them, and then just needing to find alternatives. I think it was interesting what you were saying. This one of your motivations when you started teaching was like not to injure people and looking for a way to make things as accessible as possible. And I guess I think it's really important, and something that I think eventualists come to eventually is like meeting people where they're at and just trying to find ways to make the benefits that we get from this practice as like transferable as possible. And was that maybe something that you found, that just the intensity of these practices in terms of the people you were teaching to were just not that useful? And so to try and find the alternative to make it just more accessible for people.
Yeah, I think, some practice in yoga, I think, look, the inclusivity and accessibility, I think, has got better in yoga over the years. But definitely years ago, there were some classes I'd go to where props were not really encouraged, or very specific positioning of the body was encouraged, like forward folds had to be done with your feet together. And like, actually, that doesn't really work for my body. And, and when you look at Ashtanga, Ashtanga was designed for teenage Indian boys to burn off their sexual energy so they could sit in meditation. Well, for some people, probably feet together is hip distance. For if you're a very narrow, slender person, or teenager, maybe you do have feet, the hips that are as narrow as your feet together. But for a lot of people, that definitely doesn't work. So there were lots of things I started to find in class or instructions that were being given that I didn't agree with and I wasn't happy with, and they didn't work for me. And I think, having your own injuries are a very good teacher. Certainly for me, injuring, I mean, I had periods when I injured my back, where I would lie on the floor and just cry because I could barely even roll over in bed for periods of time. And I sort of kept sort of promising, please, if I just could get a little bit better and move again, I promise I'm going to look after myself more. And so my own practice came more about looking after me. And so sometimes that means I'm going to need quite a lot of props. Sometimes, my hands don't come to the floor. I'm going to need, when I forward bend, to have blocks underneath me, and so are other people. And I could look around the room and see, I wanted to make it easier for people. I wanted people to enjoy the benefits of yoga that I receive. I wanted them also to experience and not be put off, because I do hear from people that you can come to class and get really put off. It's quite scary coming to a yoga class for your first time. And, everyone's there in their, fancy leggings and, and looking very flexible. And if you're not very flexible, it can be really, quite daunting. But actually, I always say yoga's easier if you're not flexible. Because if you're not flexible, you immediately feel the stretch. If you're flexible, as we know with hypermobile people, they're always looking for a bit further to try and get the stretch. And so actually they're maybe not feeling it in quite the same way. But if you're flexible, yoga's easier and you come to the challenge quicker, probably, to have to work with the breathing, to sit with the challenges, which maybe are your tight hamstrings or something else.
It's a nice way to think about it. I must be very, very good at yoga then, because I don't think I've ever found anything easy in yoga. I always remember the first yoga class I ever went to, and the teacher said something like, we're just going to fold forward from the hips. And it was like she was speaking to me in Chinese. I couldn't even comprehend what that could possibly mean. But thankfully, with time, these things tend to get a little bit better. So as you mentioned briefly, you have come to start to work with people with cancer and using yoga as a way of working with people with cancer. And it'd be great, I think, if you could maybe speak a little to how you got into that. And then also as a yoga teacher myself, I would be relatively ignorant, I think, as to what the maybe unique challenges and then also maybe the unique benefits yoga might present to someone who has cancer. So maybe if you could speak a little bit to that as well, that'd be amazing.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I've been teaching now for about 5 years, constantly on the look around for trainings and things that might help me improve as a teacher. But also I started to think I'd quite like to give back to my community. I'd like to, find something that could maybe really be more supportive to people. And it just so happened at the time, Yoga Campus, which was a training home in London, was running a yoga they called it Yoga for Survivors. I was an American teacher, came over. Her name was Laura Kupperman. And she ran a training that I think it was 150 hours, which is quite a lot, considering that a normal teacher training is about 200 hours. But it wasn't all face-to-face. It was a great training, and she mentored me for a year. So when I first started teaching classes, I would send her my class plan, why I taught, what I included, what I didn't include, who was coming into the room, that kind of thing. So it was a really good training. And I started working at a cancer centre in Battersea in London. And it was a lovely cancer centre. It sadly went bust with COVID. And as a lot of charities really struggled with COVID. And I was working there, and it was really sort of scruffy centre. It was a brilliant centre because they really supported people. At the time, I was practicing it at a studio called Try Yoga, which was a big studio in London, which had many studios across London and beautiful props, very clean, very organized, and I thought, oh, I'd love people to experience what I experience here at Try Yoga. I'd love the people that go to my cancer center to maybe have an opportunity of experiencing this. But was very aware that when you're diagnosed with cancer, it's an expensive experience because, if you're self-employed, you might not be earning any money while you're not able to work. You might need childcare. You might have to get taxis. You might have to stay overnight if you don't live near a hospital. So there's a lot of costs involved with cancer. And, the great thing to be able to offer something which is free, I thought would be a brilliant thing. And at the time, a company offered to potentially sponsor me because they had a charitable trust. They started talking to me about it. So I approached Jonathan Satin, who owned Try Yoga, and said, look, I might have some money to rent a yoga studio. Would you possibly rent me one of the studio spaces, and what would it cost? And we started having a discussion. And in the meantime, the charity didn't vote for me. They voted for another charity, or the trust did. And so I had to go back to Jonathan Satin and say, look, I'm really sorry, but I don't actually have the money to do the studio anymore. But thank you for, engaging with conversation with me. And he said, you know what, if you're happy to give your time for free, you can have the space for free. And so we started this free class, and I'm really proud of that. And I'm very grateful to Jonathan Satin for believing in it and seeing that it was important, for a big commercial studio to see that this would be a good thing to have on the class. And that sort of grew. And then it grew even more, I would say, during COVID, because when we went into COVID, I put everything online. And, and suddenly then I went from being a London-based teacher to being, certainly national throughout the country. People could get hold of me. People could, I had people coming in from abroad. And so that really did change things. And it also gave me, in a way, a better connection with people, because I don't know, you may have experienced this yourself coming into a class. You go into a class, the teacher's often at the front asking about injuries, or has anyone got anything they want to let me know? And, you might go up and you might quietly speak to the teacher about whatever's happening. But on Zoom, you could maybe privately message me, but generally people would talk about things quite publicly. And it really sort of hit me that people were really struggling with side effects. That was the main thing people were coming to class with. They were coming with these side effects that they're experiencing because, treatment for cancer has really improved. And although there are more people impacted by cancer, treatment has massively improved, even just over the 11 years I've been doing these classes. So people are living now with cancer, but they're living longer now with side effects of the treatment for cancer. And so often what would happen, we'd start as a class on Zoom and I'd say, how can I support you all today? Is there any requests? And somebody would come in saying one thing or another thing. And then what was interesting was somebody else would then interject and say, well, actually, that thing Vicky did last week, that really worked for me. So that was a good learning curve for me. Oh, that's interesting. That did really help you. Okay, great. So that's good. And we'll try to do that again, or we'll try a variation of it. And so through my students, I was able to really grow and learn so much more sort of, in 2020 with the lockdown. So what are people coming to, and what maybe you mentioned it might be daunting. Yeah. And I think it is really daunting. I remember when I first started teaching these classes, I was quite scared. I was almost scared. I don't think I used the word cancer very much in my life. I hadn't got my own personal experience of cancer. And it is quite daunting. There are a few things that I think that teachers should know, which is why I started running these trainings myself, because teachers kept contacting me to ask me about things. There are a couple of safety things that I think are important to know, and that is that if someone has had lymph nodes removed, for example, or had radiotherapy to an area where there are lymph nodes, that person is at lifelong risk of lymphedema. And lymphedema is a chronic swelling that happens when the lymphatic system basically isn't able to work properly. And if it's not working properly and it's not moving the fluid out of the body, you can develop lymphedema. And lymphedema is chronic, so it's it's not something that you can get and then it goes away. And So what you want to be safety, you want to think of not doing something too quickly, not putting too much strain on the lymphatic system too quickly. So people want to build up range of movement first because you want to get back the full range of movement in that area. So say if it was breast cancer, that movement in the shoulder area again, then slowly building back strength. So i.e. someone coming straight into a class and maybe doing a downward dog might not be appropriate for somebody who's just had breast cancer surgery or lymph nodes removed or radiotherapy to the chest or shoulder area. But then also knowing on an empowering point that yoga is really good at stimulating the lymphatic system. So if you do have a lymphatic system which is a bit sluggish or not working quite as well, things we do in yoga can be really helpful for that, because we have lots of exercises where we're elevating maybe an arm higher than our heart or legs higher than our heart. That gravity helps with that. Muscles contract and release. That creates a natural pumping moving in your body. And also when we're stretching, we're opening up tight areas, and tight areas in the body just act like a gate. They just sort of prevent the movement of fluid in the body. So there's a sort of, an empowering side that you can help people with their lymphatic system. And it's part of their immune system. So that's good. Helping their body to be able to fight things. Another sort of safety thing is that obviously treatment for cancer, some treatments for cancer will affect or will attack fast-growing cells in the body, i.e. cancer cells. We also have very rapidly dividing cells in our bones. So we know that treatment for cancer can sometimes affect our bones, and it can mean we end up with a weakening of the bones, maybe like osteoporosis or the precursor to that, which is osteopenia. So someone who is very young, they could be in their 20s or 30s, could actually have osteoporosis. So they could be at risk of fracture. And so you want to have a practice that's safe, that is not going to put too much strain maybe on areas of the body that could fracture. So thoracic spine, the rib cage part of your spine, for example, helping people do some things that can strengthen bones. And, yoga is very good at improving bone quality. It does help with bone density. I think sometimes the evidence seems to show nowadays that we do need probably more weight bearing, i.e. like heavier weights to help with our bone density. But even balancing on one leg is going to increase the bone density, because you've got twice the body weight going down just through one leg. Teaching people to be more mindful, more adaptable, so that if they were going to fall, they might be able to catch themselves. Improving maybe the feet, getting the feet more mobile so that people are more connected to their feet when they're moving. And again, that's empowering, because if someone's told they've got osteoporosis, and again, sometimes people aren't given very good information or very limited information about things. And it's not a criticism of the medical industry, because I think it's a fantastic industry, and it's especially in the UK, it's very strained. And so sometimes people don't have time maybe to pass on information. So people will come in saying, oh, I've got lymphedema or osteoporosis. And when I asked what advice they were given, they were maybe not given any advice. Or some people with osteoporosis were told, will avoid forward folding or avoid twisting. Well, that's pretty hard to live your life like that, to avoid ever forward folding. How do you put your shoes on? How do you turn to check it's so safe to cross the road? So what I want to do in trainings is empower people. Yes, okay, they are positions where you could be putting the body at risk, but actually you can do these things really safely. You can forward fold using props. You mentioned folding from the tops of the thighs, twists when you've got length and you're rotating without force. These are really good things. So you teach people things that they can take out into the world and use in their normal life. Again, it empowers people. You go from a position of thinking you have something you can do nothing about, and the evidence is there that there is very little support for side effects of treatment for cancer. Sometimes there's absolutely zero support for any side effects. And what I also hear from a lot of people is that there's a sense of feeling, I'm so grateful I'm alive. I've had my treatment for cancer. I've come out the other side. I don't really want to complain about anything else. And I know how busy these doctors are. And I don't even know who I would go back to, but I don't feel like I want to burden anyone. And I'm here. So, I've got all these side effects, but I'm just going to sort of carry on with it. And so telling people that actually there are some things you can do about it. And there is more evidence-based studies out there now looking at yoga and cancer and how much benefit it is. And then some of it is, I use my students as my evidence. I don't necessarily have a study for something, but I've had many students come back in to say that really makes a difference. So I've had people tell me with lymphedema that for 24 to 48 hours afterwards, their arm feels lighter, doesn't feel quite as heavy. They've got more movement in it, and that they felt better. Now it won't last because it's chronic, but all these little things are great to know, that stuff we do in yoga, as long as we're applying the safety elements, there's so much we can do to help with the side effects. And the side effects, it's quite a long list of potential side effects that people could experience.
I really like the emphasis that you're placed on the word empowerment, because similar to you, I've no direct experience of cancer, but I can only imagine the enormity of a diagnosis like that, and the challenges that would bring, not just physically, but also just in terms of how you look at the world and see yourself, and to be able to empower people to manage that a bit better is amazing. And I think it's so commendable what yourself and Jonathan and Try Yoga did by making the classes accessible. It's an amazing thing to be able to offer to people. And so I'm kind of curious, because I know you said that at the beginning you were even a little bit hesitant with the classes to even use the word cancer. So for anyone who would be maybe curious around these kind of practices, what would it look like? Would it be very, very similar to a normal yoga class, normal in inverted commas, but to a what people would normally expect from a yoga class, just with small modifications here and there? Or would it look quite different to what people might find in a flow class? Or what would someone expect from a one of these kind of practices?
Yeah, so people often say about my classes, they look like they're very gentle, but they've got these hidden challenges. So firstly, I do like to challenge people, because one of the biggest side effects of treatment for cancer is fatigue. And fatigue is not the sort of fatigue that can be eased by a good night's sleep. It's really full-on fatigue. And that is due to the fact that when lots of cells are being, cells in our body are dying all the time, and our body clears them away and takes them away all the time. That's happening. Cells are regenerating and dying, but when you have treatment and a lot of cells die in one period, that's a lot of energy to take that out of the body. So that's why people get really fatigued. But the other reason that people get fatigued is because they lose muscle mass. You have periods of bed rest or periods where you're unable to move. You start to lose a bit of muscle mass, and that contributes to the fatigue. So it's really important that people do things that are strengthening the muscles to help them, just to be able to stand in their shower, just to be able to do their daily activities, to get up off the sofa, to walk up some stairs. And people will have different things that they want to be able to do. They might want to be able to pick up their kids from school or grandkids from school, or do their own shopping, or have some independence. So building muscle strength is really important. So I would say my classes are probably a gentle flow with some challenges that I will try to push people just to try and build back some muscle strength. But I don't want to deplete people either. So I'm trying to find a little bit of a balance. I'm giving permission for people to do what they want. I tell them that everything in this class is optional apart from your breathing. Yeah, that's the only thing that's not optional. So you want to stay with your breathing. But if you just do, a couple of repetitions of something and you pause and you just want to rest, that's absolutely fine. In fact, you're doing good yoga, because if you're doing something that is being kind to yourself, well, as we know, kindness is yoga, and ahimsa, non-harming, so I will encourage that. And I think maybe different to a normal class, I'll discuss why we're doing something, not the whole way through the class, every single pose, but I might say, elevating your arm, or this is really good for the lymphatic system, opening up the side body. This is just trying to breathe into your tight areas, breathe into areas you may have been guarding or protecting, because if you've had surgery, you might be really nervous about coming back into a class and starting to move your body again, but you can breathe into areas, visualize your breath going into the areas. And some areas you can actually feel the breath going into it. So you can actually get an internal massage just by using your breathing. And I might explain things about the lymphatic system, how that's beneficial. Or I might say, certain poses, this is going to be good strengthening for the bones. I have quite a few people with peripheral neuropathy. So this is where you end up with, on the easiest side effect would be numbing and tingling in your hands and feet. And it can even end up being quite painful in hands and feet. So people can struggle with balance. They can start to struggle, even doing little small skills like buttoning up, jumpers and things like that, because they start to lose the sensation in their hands. So I might do a whole lot of hand sequencing things or foot things and explain that, again, there's not a lot of evidence out there that says if you open up the feet, if you open up the hands, that's going to actually help with peripheral neuropathy, because there haven't been any studies. But it does seem to make sense. If we can keep those areas really mobile, things are going to flow more freely. If we keep them strong, when we're, if you lose connection to muscles or lose connection, you stop using a part of your body, you're going to lose some of the muscle strength. So we do want to do things that keep the muscles strong to keep that area moving. So I may just be putting in little bits like that. And again, there'll be quite a big focus on breathing and talking about anxiety and breath. So I will, we'll discuss, because that's obviously, a huge side effect, being impacted by cancer. Probably the moment you even were worried about that, you may have changed your breathing, and certainly being told you had cancer, most likely you held your breath with shock. So reminding people, just giving people these tools they can take with them, next time they're waiting for an appointment or waiting for a scan or waiting for some results. When they're feeling anxious, they can remember some of the tools they've done in class of breathing techniques that they could maybe just do while they're sitting and waiting, just to help themselves, calm them down. And, as I say to people, there isn't a one size fits all in yoga. Some things I've done, some breathing things that I just don't work for me. And then other breathing things or other visualized things that really work for me. Some people are more visual. Some people are more kinesthetic. They can connect to the body more. So, I'm just trying to put in lots of different things that people can, like a buffet, so people can find the things that are going to be working for them, maybe just in that moment in time, so that you can leave class better than you arrived in class. And that was one of our lines when we first started the classes. You don't need to feel well to come to these classes. That may differ from a normal yoga class. Probably if you weren't feeling well, you might not go to your regular yoga class. But this is a class where actually, if you don't feel well, still come to class, because you probably will feel better at the end of it.
I find it interesting you were speaking there. So talking about your, peppering in these little explanations, maybe giving a bit more information than you'd maybe get in a normal yoga class as to why we're doing this. And I remember at the beginning you said with Ashtanga, one of the things you really liked about it is that when you learned the sequence, then you could kind of go off and do it on your own when you were doing all your other things. And I imagine that's one of the goals with this kind of work is, as you're saying, empowering people to know that these are relatively simple things. Not always easy, I'm sure, for everybody, but relatively simple things that people can continue to do to support themselves in some shape or form. As I said, I've never faced something as big of a challenge as cancer, but I know in times of my life when I'm, for whatever reason, not feeling at my best, it's so easy to forget about the small things that you can do. When you maybe sometimes are getting focused on bigger things that you're finding a struggle. So I'm sure I can imagine in those classes, just those little explanations, if we move our hands this little bit, if we stretch into here, must have a profound impact on people as that little reminder that, like, it doesn't have to be big. these small things that I can do can have a substantial impact.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, especially, when you've been impacted by cancer, you become a patient for a period of time. And a patient sort of implies that everything is being done to you. And often people don't feel they're in much control. There's a lot of language there that they maybe don't understand, as we know. I mean, I've been with a doctor explaining something to me and I think, oh, I don't understand all your terminology. So it can be a very confusing time in someone's life and you can feel a bit out of control. And the yoga can put you back in that driving seat. You might feel like you're a passenger and now you can get back in the driving seat and find these things that are working for you. Maybe it's just a few stretches that you do every day that are helping out with something like radiation fibrosis, which is where the tissues get a bit bunched up, because there are lots of side effects that are permanent. They're for life, and we do need to be constantly moving the body to help ease those side effects. So just teaching people a couple of things that they can maybe do will be, is really helpful. And it's probably the times I feel most proud about these classes is when someone comes in and says, oh my gosh, I had to go for a scan and I was so stressed and I got myself really worked up. And then I remembered your breathing thing and I started doing that breathing thing you do. and that really got me through it. In fact, they were really impressed with me that I wasn't, hyperventilating, or I was able to do the breath hold. Sometimes there's specific breath holds you need to be able to do when you have radiotherapy. But I was able to do them and it meant I had my treatment really quickly and I was able to get out of the hospital quickly. So then I think, oh, I'm proud of that. That makes me feel really good to know that breathing technique, it's not my breathing technique, but it's, one that I've learned that I was able to pass on. So yeah, so I think that's a huge thing about these classes. That and community, bringing people together, like people that can share and support each other. That I think is another really wonderful thing that Yoga for Cancer can do.
Because you think that's, because I guess to a certain extent, it must be just so different for everybody else, but there's, I'm sure for a lot of people with cancer, there's probably, as in some situations anyways, there's probably nothing preventing them outside of maybe costs and stuff like that. But I'm sure plenty of people with cancer could probably physically be okay in a regular yoga class. But do you think that's maybe one of the appeals of the kind of things that you offer, is just for people to know that they're going to be with people who are going through a similar situation? There's maybe no pressure, not that there will be anyways, to hide what you're going through, and just that sort of community support must be in and of itself a huge thing for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sometimes I get people who come to class and they just come, they have a regular yoga practice and they might just come for a period while they're going through treatment and then they go back to their regular yoga practice. I have some people that have never ever done yoga, and during the period of them being diagnosed with cancer, someone along the way has said, oh, I read yoga could be helpful, or they've heard about the classes, so they join the class. So they might be absolutely brand new to yoga. And as we know, sometimes if you find a teacher that you resonate with or feel comfortable with, sometimes we stick with those teachers just because there's a safety sort of security of that. And then I think there are people that come because they know the needs will be met in class, so they can relax more because they feel it's going to be safe. There's not going to be anything in that class that could possibly put them at risk of lymphedema or could maybe be detrimental. And so I think there's some people that just feel like I can relax here because I know you understand the side effects and you understand maybe what could be done and what maybe not to be done. So there is that. But yeah, people can definitely be practicing regular, yoga classes. And, once we build back range of movement, once you've built back strength again, there's no reason why someone can't go back to doing, I've had people that had an Ashtanga practice that went back to doing their Ashtanga practice because that's what was really important to them. And I think, again, we want to find the things that are really important to us. And if you can help someone get back to those important things for them, that's great, because they want, people would like to go back. You never go back to normal when you've been impacted by cancer, but you can find a new norm. and maybe you do are, adapting your class. Maybe you find a way to do different things in your class once you know what to do. But you might want to go back to whatever it was. I had a lovely young lady. She was a trapeze artist, and she wanted to go back to being a trapeze artist. And she'd sort of been told, because she'd been told not to be very mindful with weight bearing stuff. And I said, I can't see any reason why eventually you won't be able to go back to doing your trapeze art, because that's what she loved. Imagine you've been impacted by cancer. Now you can't do something that you really, really love. And I work very closely with physiotherapists, and I check things out with physiotherapists, a few oncology physiotherapists I work with. And, they all say the same thing, building back strength slowly. There's no reason why you can't go back to doing whatever it was you were doing before. So yeah, your regular yoga class, for example.
Yeah, there's a lady that I follow on Instagram. I would have met her just a long time ago at a training. So I don't know her particularly well, but, know her through social media. And she has suffered with cancer in the past. But she would have posted videos of herself practicing as she's going through treatment, and still practicing as gracefully and as beautifully as she ever would before. And it's just so lovely to see, because I imagine, again, for a lot of people, it might feel like a diagnosis like that means the end to a lot of the things that you really value. But as you said, with the right kind of approach, there's no reason why, all things going well, you can't return to these kind of things. And again, I think that's why that there's obviously so much in life that is outside of your control. But then there is a lot of things even within that we can control, or we can at least work upon improving. And if you do your little bit, it's like compound interest. These little investments can eventually add up to something huge, which might be, again, returning to trapeze or something amazing like that.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's good for teachers to understand, some of the sort of things that are happening, so that they can maybe just be aware of, how they could support someone in their regular classes without it detracting from their whole class. Like you would with someone who came in and said that they'd had a, knee injury, or had broken a toe, or had a hip replaced, or something like that. It's just another thing just to be aware of, because, unfortunately, the stats on being diagnosed with cancer aren't good. They're pretty high and look like they're increasing. But as I mentioned, maybe the stats on people getting cancer are increasing, but the treatment for cancer is improving. So people are living longer with cancer side effects. So yeah, I think it's good to be able to empower teachers as well, so they feel that they're comfortable, because I know there have been odd times people have told me that they were excluded from a class because they have cancer and the teacher didn't feel confident having them in the class.
And I know it's probably would be a very difficult question to answer, because, again, it's so contextual. But if there was like one main bit of advice that you would give to a teacher who at this moment in time is not that familiar with the side effects of cancer, the variances that can be, and so on and so forth, if there was just one bit of advice you could give to a teacher on how to make a class more accessible, what would that be?
Oh, it's really hard, because obviously, the thing with cancer is that it's often not cancer that you're dealing with. It's the individual, because we're all so, we're all so unique and original. So, what might be right for someone might not be right for someone else. So it's actually really hard to give that advice. I would say, what I try to impart with my classes is teaching people to be kind to themselves, to not push into pain, to be aware, pain is generally your body's way of telling you to back off or to ease out of something. Imparting to your students maybe that they are responsible for themselves. I know as a teacher, of course, we're responsible in terms of, we're holding space for people. We're hopefully giving practices that are safe. But at the same point, I have no idea what it feels like to be somebody else. I only know what it feels like to be me. And so if you're working with someone who's coming back into your class, being aware that there is no perfect shape of pose, that they may need to adapt and they may need support. And that, if you're doing a pose with an arm straight and their elbows bent, that's fine. Does it really change the pose that much? How important is it to have the arms straight, bent? So I suppose it's really broad, but just being flexible with what people are bringing in that moment and being okay with it. Sometimes as a teacher, our ego gets involved and we like it when everyone's looking like they're all in this perfect shape. But really, what are you trying to gain from the pose? And is that person still getting the benefits of that, even if they're not quite looking how it would in a textbook, or your image of this pose? I suppose it's really broad because, it really might depend. Someone with bowel cancer coming in with a colostomy bag is going to be very different for someone coming in having had breast cancer, maybe, limited range of movement, not maybe able to do downward dogs, so there's so many things. So I'm sorry that answer's really broad, but I would say, imparting to other people that they're responsible for themselves, that they need to be kind to themselves, move in a way that works for them. Don't worry about anybody else. Don't worry what you think the pose should look like. What does it feel like? Can you still breathe in the pose? If you're holding your breath or you can't breathe anymore, you've probably lost a little bit of the element of yoga. So finding a shape that works for you that you can breathe into. The shape of the pose is not as important as the shape of the breath. The shape of the breath is more important than the shape of the pose. Sorry, this is a bit broad. I'm sorry.
No. It's lovely advice, and I think it's just so applicable for all teaching anybody, really. That again kind of comes back to this idea of the empowerment and just valuing the individual experience. And I personally love floppy elbows in all poses. It's my personal preference. I have one more question that I want to ask you, which is not so directly related to the work you're doing with the yoga with cancer, but I think it would be an interesting thing for yoga teachers to hear your thoughts on. Is that you mentioned that you did the year-long mentorship, which I think that kind of direct relationship with someone guiding your teaching is probably in some ways becoming less common in the fitness industry in general, not even just with yoga. And so I was wondering if you wanted to speak a little bit about how you found that experience and the benefits of it, because I think something like that is just so valuable for anybody looking to improve with their teaching in particular.
Yeah. I think it is really valuable. I know when I first started teaching in 2008, there was a fellow teacher that I knew. Her name's Zephyr Wildman, and she was a very experienced teacher, more experienced than me. And I turned to her a lot. She wasn't my mentor. I didn't do the teacher training through her studios or anything like that, but I knew her because I went to her classes, and I would phone her up a lot saying, I've got someone in my class with no meniscus, what do I do? And she would help give me advice and sort of support me. And, so she became a mentor and now is one of my very good friends. But that was invaluable to me. I don't know who I would have turned to. The teacher that I studied with was American. He went back to America, so he wasn't in the UK. And to me, it was so beneficial having someone. And I know with the yoga for cancer, that was really important because it was scary. It was really frightening, with people coming into the room. And I it was still very new to me. And just to be able to go through what I taught, to talk through the challenges, because as we know, sometimes there are challenges when you're teaching yoga. You might have a disruptive person in your class and you don't know whether you handled it very well. There are things that happen sometimes, and you look back after class and you think, oh, could I have done that in a better way? Did I handle that okay? And it's really nice to have a community or to be able to, turn to and say, to talk through these things. So, yeah, I mean, I wish we had peer supervision as yoga teachers. And I've been trying to set something up for people that do my yoga for cancer training with one of the I have a palliative care nurse who talks on my 40-hour training, and her and I are trying to set up supervision for yoga teachers that have done the Yoga for Cancer training to just be there as a support for challenges that can come up in this work, because obviously sometimes there's losses, and that can be really quite hard sometimes to deal with. So yeah, I think those things are great. And, I had a teacher I studied with for 9 years. And so it wasn't quite a mentorship, but I had the same teacher that I studied with for 9 years. And I'm now I'm a bit bereft. I haven't got someone to study with at the moment, and that's quite hard. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and have this conversation. I've learned a lot. I usually take notes, just if I, to remind myself of something if I'm going to ask a question about, but I've actually just been taking notes for well, that's really interesting. I need to look into that a bit more. And we're, as I say, I'm really excited to have you here, in October for one of your trainings. And so maybe to finish, if you want to maybe just take a few moments to give people an idea around what to expect, what you'll be offering. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for having me and chatting to me. It's been such a pleasure to chat to you. So yeah, the day training we're running, so it's going to be 6 hours, and it's just really looking at sort of introduction of working with people with cancer, so that as a teacher, you can just feel a little bit more confident maybe about people coming into the room. So we'll just look at what is cancer, and looking at the different types of treatment for cancer and what side effects they may bring up and what people might be experiencing in your class, and just creating looking at a few ways to make the classes safe, and then looking at, what we have in our yoga toolbox, because I really love the idea of building a toolbox, that you have where you can sort of dip in to find these yoga tools. And, and often as teachers, we have them. We just don't realize we could use them maybe for certain things. And so, yeah, that's what the day training will do. And it's a good opportunity to come together and start talking about something, especially if you feel uncomfortable talking about it. If you're, some people do feel nervous about using the word cancer, but, if you're working with people with cancer, but you've got to be able to, say the word cancer, and to be able to, just intelligently support people, and just understanding what a little bit about what they might be going through, and how you can support them, and an opportunity to ask me any questions as well. So I've been doing this work for about 11 years. So have lots of studio experience, because I've taught, I teach about 5 or 6 classes a week, yoga for cancer and private work. So, I've got lots of experience, come across lots of different situations. So chance to quiz me on things that you may be experiencing, or people that you're already working with in class, and just, making your classes accessible to people that are coming into the room that are living with cancer.
It sounds like it's going to be a great day. All things going well. I've got 2 young kids, so sometimes it's hard to plan too far ahead, but all going well. I will be attending myself, and very much looking forward to it. So thank you again so much for taking the time. It was really lovely to get the chance to talk to you. And yeah, we're looking forward to having you with us very soon.
I can't wait. I'm so excited to come out to Dublin and meet you all. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.